Welcome to Winchester Cafe Sci Online. Tonight's event has proved extremely popular and looks like our best attendance ever. It may be some time before we can all sensibly gather in person, and online events allow people to join from further afield. We've even been able to insert some extra events into the programme. And thanks to all those who've donated. If you Google livable cities, you'll most likely find links to the Economist Intelligence Unit League Table, where you'll see Vienna has retained the top spot for the second year running. So tonight I'm virtually sitting outside the Hofburg Palace in Vienna. But the criteria used emphasise present comfort and convenience. And Melbourne held the top spot for a number of years, but is currently in crisis over COVID-19, with 3,000 people barred from leaving a tower block complex. Tonight's talk will focus on making our cities sustainable and fit for the future to tackle disruptors, including climate change and pandemics. Our speaker is Professor of Energy and Buildings within Engineering and Physical Sciences at the University of Southampton. His research is based on understanding energy use in the built environment, whether this is at home, at work, or at a broader urban scale. He's a specialist in microgeneration technologies, including solar thermal, photovoltaics, micro wind, and micro combined heat and power. He's the Director of Programs for Postgraduate Taught Energy, overseeing the MSc Energy and Sustainability and MSc Sustainable Energy Technologies program. He's an associate editor of the IET Renewable Power Generation Journal and an energy-based research assessor for several national funding agencies. He specialises in energy in the built environment, where he teaches modules related to energy performance assessment, climate change and settlements, energy resources and bioclimatic design. So can I ask you please to welcome Professor Patrick James.
Thank you for that introduction. I'm going to talk about some work that's been done over the past few years, of which some quite big research programs, of which I was just one member. So this is not all my work. I'm talking around aspects of work by Tatiana Sanchez, Victor Etehotua, Lydia Herbert, and many members of a big project called Liveable Cities, which completed recently. I'm then going to talk a little bit about COVID-19 and what that might mean for our cities going forward, because we are already seeing changes really dramatically that 6 months ago you wouldn't have thought even one of those road closures would have happened so quickly. Yeah. So when we talk about sustainability, we have these three interlocking circles: economic, social and environmental, and it's this sweet spot in the middle where all three are in balance, which is what we consider as sustainability. Obviously, it's very difficult to come up with policies which hit that sweet spot in the middle. We see that at the moment, where we're trying to balance these tensions in terms of COVID-19 and the economy and health, and trying to continue these two things pulling against one another. So trying to come up with policies which sit in that true center is very difficult. So you've already heard a quick introduction about me, but very brief recap. I've worked on national programs for photovoltaics, solar thermal, micro wind. My work there really stopped the selling of micro wind in the UK, demonstrating that there is no financial return, no significant generation from these devices in the built environment, that they should not be installed. Ground source heat pumps, air source heat pumps, energy efficiency. But with all of these things, I'm really interested in what's the impact of people. And when you have people and a technology, people never behave as you expect. And that creates what's called a performance gap. The building physicist says you will save this much. When you do something, you generally save much less. And that's because you don't understand how people behave. And I'm really interested in the interface of technology and people. And whether that's at home or it's at work, It's the same tensions occur. So I've been involved in this very big project across multiple universities called Liveable Cities, trying to think about how are we going to live in the future, thinking about an aging population, climate change, mobility, how might that affect the civil infrastructure in our cities? How does that need to change? But when we think about cities, different aspects of cities change at different rates. And you really need to think about that. But the key thing is you need a vision for your city. What do you want it to become? If you don't know what you're aiming for, there's no way you can even think about policies to get there. So really, for me, the key thing is to have a clear vision of what your city should be like. What do you want it to be? And then you can think about interventions, maybe at the street level, at the neighbourhood, at the city scale, to try and deliver on that city vision. So that's what I'm going to talk about, and then a little bit about COVID-19. So this is a picture of Southampton. And what I'm really showing here is that cities are evolving, but over very different timescales. If you think about the impact of climate, that is developing over potentially very long periods. Culture, maybe a few hundred years. Technology, maybe years or decades. And then we have a pandemic, which we have now, which is potentially fundamentally changing our cities and has occurred over a period of 3 months. So cities have to respond to these challenges which occur at massively stretched timeframes, which is actually quite challenging. So this is a map of Southampton from 1560 to 2015, where the dark area represents the actual city core, and you can see how it's expanding with time. And now Southampton's expanded to the point where it's essentially constrained by geography, by rivers and by the motorway, and it is now essentially enclosed. Yeah. This piece of work by Tatiana Sanchez was looking at how do you define the center of a city. So that would be all the key assets, such as the center of legislation, banks, major retail aspects. And this was tracking what was considered as the center of Southampton from 1560 up until the present day. And actually what you can see is the city center in this analysis is moving north with time. And then as soon as West Quay was opened, it's like a massive magnet, and it's pulled the center of the city towards the northwest. And potentially that's compromised the eastern side of the city at that point, because the focus of the city has moved. So whilst West Quay could be seen as a development which regenerated that part of the city, maybe on the other side of the city, it's weakened it because the centroid has moved. So there's less activity on the east side of the city. So I like to talk about disruptors in cities. A disruptor being a person or a thing or a system or a process that changes the operation of a city from the usual. So I normally ask my students, give me some suggestions of disruptors, and then I draw them and say, come on, give me some more, think of something else. So I'm just going to give you 30 seconds to try and think of people or technology or events or services which you think act as disruptors to cities to change the way they normally operate.
Perhaps ask people to put them in the chat.
That would be great. If people can put them in the chat, then we'll wait to see if there's some suggestions. That'd be really good. The arrival of the railway, yes, that's good. Earthquakes, yeah. Economic floods, COVID-19 is definitely a city disruptor, yes. A new Uber, very good, yes. Pollution, I like that. Greta Thunberg, very good. Tim Berners-Lee, yes. Carpet bombing, yes. Any more? So interesting, we have examples of pollution, protests, pressure groups, yes, good. Politicians, driverless cars, yes. Industry, hospitals, the rise of the cruise industry, yes, that's definitely a disruptor in Southampton. Online shopping, yes, that's a massive one. Okay, it's a really good mix. So far, we've got only one person is a disruptor. So we've had Greta Thunberg. Can you think of any other people who you might think of as a disruptor? For me, they take to Twitter late at night. Yeah, Bezos definitely, yes, because of Amazon. Yeah, Nigel Farage, yes. Musk, yeah, very good. Okay, it's a really good mix. Trump, that was the one I was looking for, yes. That's a very good mix. So this was my list. So Amazon, Brexit, the internet, Tesla, PM10, and this is diesel particulates. So this is the Volkswagen scandal with air quality in diesel vehicles in cities. Climate change, terrorism, China due to globalization. Airbnb is an interesting disruptor. If you think about Paris, the center of Paris is essentially an Airbnb zone. And if you're a hotelier in Paris, you're really not happy because you're competing against a rival who is fundamentally cheaper than you. Uber in terms of transport in the city, eBay, Apple, the smartphone. No one learns how to read a map anymore. They just look at their phone. If you go into a shop to buy a new pair of shoes, there is a risk you try them on and then you look on your phone to check how much they are online. And really that makes this device a massive disruptor because it makes bricks and mortar retail really challenged because it's trying to compete with an industrial shed with none of the overheads. And we're really seeing that issue now in the news. Yes, student populations are a big disruptor in some cities, particularly Southampton. So that's a good mix. And yes, Greta. So And what we're seeing at the moment in our cities is this. These are both in Southampton. So the Toys R Us site and the Debenham site, they're closed. But really, each of these sites is now an opportunity for change in our city centre. And we don't need these big volume retailers anymore. The internet has changed the way that people shop. And the footprint of these shops is fundamentally too big to sustain themselves. So really, each time one of these sites become available in a city, that's an opportunity to change the city and to change the city in a way which works for its population, to try and address some of the shortcomings which may exist in the city form. So we need to treat every one of these sites as an opportunity to deliver towards our vision for the city. So here's some pictures of Southampton. What's interesting about Southampton is unless you see that boat, you would not know you're by the sea. For a port, it's strangely disconnected from the sea. If you visited the city, until you see a large boat, you don't even realize you are by the sea. It's got a really bad disconnect from the water. And so maybe that would be your vision for Southampton. How could we reconnect the city with the water? And then all the things you try and do in the city, always bear that in mind as an approach. these are some examples of things which have been tried in Southampton. This is an urban beach in the city centre. This is the West Quay 2 extension and reconnecting the city walls as a feature of the city. Previously, this was all tarmac down here and a car park. That was a real waste of a major asset in the city. And now this space is framing around the city wall. It's making really good use of that space. And this is becomes an exhibition space for events. It's a natural area to sit and enjoy this view and so on. This is very successful as a space, and you can see Festival of Light and so on trying to bring people into the city to to use these facilities and experience this part of the city, not volume retail. It has to be something else. So the Liveable Cities project I worked on, we actually had 5 types of city visions that we were aiming for. Were we an active and inclusive city, a healthy city, an evolving city, a city as a public space where you had access to everywhere, or a courteous city where people are friendly to one another all the time? And for each of these types of cities, we thought about what that might mean. What might you need to achieve to deliver on that type of city, that type of vision? And we ran various workshops with people, and we tried to rank the importance of various principles for each of these cities. For example, in that picture, it says, make everything accessible to everyone. Would that be a really important principle to follow? And this is for an analysis of Southampton, and actually what comes out as the most important thing in Southampton is to prevent the negative conditions that lead to fragmentation, ghettoization, and impoverished areas, to avoid the poorer bits of the city being cut off from the richer bits of the city. That was an analysis of Southampton brought that out as the most important thing to address. This report called the Casey Review, which came out in December 2016, interestingly, in parallel, says that inequality and social exclusion was one of the major issues in Britain's cities. And actually that's what we flagged as the major issue for Southampton to address. So we have a vision. So what do we do? These are my students thinking about how to regenerate Southampton. They're not constrained by how long a let is on a building. They can remove things as they want to try and deliver on their vision. If you're the council, it's obviously a much more challenging problem. So I'm going to talk about 3 scales: a street, a neighbourhood, and a city, to try and deliver on an active and inclusive city principle. So this is East Street in Southampton, which used to be one of the most successful streets in Southampton. People came from London to take the water at Southampton to bathe, and then they will go shopping in East Street. It's hard to imagine that today when you look at East Street. As I mentioned, West Quay arrived, and that was a massive magnet, and it moved the centre of the city to the north and west. So this is West Quay here. This is East Street down here. These numbers show the footfall going into East Street in 1997, 2003, and 2013. So you can see down here, we go from a benchmark of 94 down to 14. So we have lost almost 7 times the footfall at this point in East Street. This part of the city is literally losing its dynamism. There's no activity down here. So it's going to struggle economically. And that's been caused in some part by the shift in the centre of the city to the north and west. So retail was adapting, failing before what's happened now in 2020. So this is on the left. This is what we see as East Street today. Quite a few voids in the city, in the street. The council have been thinking about, should we pedestrianise this street? Should we go car free to try and make it a more attractive place to be? So Philip Turner, one of our researchers, worked with the retailers in this street to try and design interventions to try and regenerate this part of the city. So there was an arts festival run where they actually closed this street and then tried to understand what people would like to see in the street to make it more active, more vigorous, a better place to come and visit. So essentially you're asking people, what would you like to see in this street? What activities would make you come here? It's interesting, there is a tension between the people who visited this street when it was closed to cars and the retailers. The people who visited the street, they were in favour of pedestrianisation, whereas the retailers were very, very nervous and really not in favour of pedestrianisation. They believed people drive to their shop, get out, buy the goods and then leave again. They believed if people can't drive into the city and park outside their shop, they won't have a business. So you've got this fundamental difference between the retailers and the people visiting in the street. So at the moment, there is significant investment in Southampton around the Bargate, trying to connect down to where Debenhams was, and we have East Street south of that. The question is, the retailers in East Street, they still want people to be able to drive in their street. Maybe it gets to the point where the council says, no, we are going to just pedestrianise this area. We believe that's the best approach. And take that vision forward and say, we need to get rid of cars from this part of the city. Actually, we're seeing this now with COVID-19 very quickly. Street closures happening at a rate which really have not happened before. So that was a street. I'm now going to talk about a neighbourhood. So this is an analysis by an MSc student called Lydia Herbert, looking at Southampton in terms of various parameters. If it's dark blue on this map, it's very high, and if it's white, it's very low. So for example, access to key facilities on the right-hand side, the top, obviously it's very dark blue in the city centre because that's where all the core facilities are. That's what you'd expect. And as you go away from the city centre, there are less key facilities. But interesting, there are some areas where there appear to be some contradictions. Here, for example, we have areas of very high and very low congestion right next to one another. That doesn't seem right. We have very little parks and we have very little access to facilities. This is sort of an alarm ringing really with me. How can we have very high and very low congestion side by side and very low access to facilities and parks and so on? This is census data for 2011, and this is level of qualification. Can any of you see something in here which looks a bit strange? Do you want to say in the chat anything looks odd? Look at this map. Any offers? Okay, I'll go down one slide. Okay, any thoughts now looking at this? This is ethnicity. If we look at this map, what jumps out at you? For me, we have a very distinct color change here between this red area and everything else appears to be this yellow. So yes, people are held in by the busy road. That's exactly that. This red area appears to be constrained by this busy road. And this is what you can see in the data. It's really clear. This busy road is actually acting as a collar. This is a very poor area of the city. And actually it's constrained and cut off from the city by this really busy road. So the hard infrastructure of the city is making the conditions worse. So this is what we were looking at. How could we change things in the city to help address this issue? Because this appears to be ghettoization of impoverished areas due to the infrastructure. Yeah, Marty's telling it's the wrong side of the tracks. Yes, quite. That's it. So we were looking at how might we change the city to address this? Can we reconnect this area, produce bridges and links and so on? How can we close roads, open up new routes within the city? The football stadium, maybe it needs a new railway station. Can we leverage that investment to try and help this area to become more connected? So we leverage investment in one measure to help this poorer area in the city. Reinstate a tram network in the city to reconnect the key points, most of which are on the west of the city, to reconnect the poorer east side of the city, because they are disconnected from the successful part of the city. Interestingly, as I was doing this work, on the top right, what you can see here is the highways agency's proposals to increase the capacity of this piece of road to make it the second, to bring more traffic into the city. And this is highways agency's analysis of what might happen in terms of air quality. And of course, you can see the collar that they're highlighting. And this is actually my submission to highways agency, pointing out that this hard infrastructure is already compromising these people. And there is a real risk that what is proposed could make this worse. And they really need to think about that. If you're investing money here, you need to enable these people to connect to the city. Don't isolate them further by greater infrastructure. Now we're going to jump across the world. So this is Medellin in Colombia. What is Medellin in Colombia famous for? Yes, drugs gangs. Yeah. So what we're looking at here is a water tank in the city. Yes, drugs cartels and so on. So this is a water tank in the city. And in this image in the top right, you can see the water tank, and around it, you can see the green space. And beyond the hard fence and the security guard, shanty towns, extremely high density. There is a cable car in Medellin as well, yes. So in the city, actually one of the few parts of green space is this grass around the water tank, which is surrounded by a big fence. So we have a water tank, we have some grass, and we have a big wall or a fence and a security guard. And then you have potentially some very edgy neighborhoods just the other side of the fence. So you are paying someone to protect this infrastructure from people around it who probably don't think much of the water utility because they have no connection with it. They just see a big fence and some infrastructure that doesn't relate to them. If you are the EPM, the water company, what could you do that would be really, really radical? Get rid of the wall, remove the fence. Yes, so we are tear down the wall. That's exactly what happened to make it a park. So this is really radical infrastructure change. Get rid of that wall, connect it to the community, as you say, so that becomes a community space. And then the people who live near that water tank, they really care about it. That's their asset, their infrastructure. And don't you dare damage it, because that's their space. So on the right here, you can see these water tanks around the city. So they ran workshops with people who live around these water tanks. What would you like them to become? What infrastructure would you like us to provide for you? If we rip that fence down, what should we provide alongside a water tank? And this is what they produce. They're called water parks. So here's the water tank. But now we have classrooms, health centres, internet, toilets, showers. And down around here, these are all the shanty towns around it. And these people are really proud of their water parks. And they actually organise football matches against other water parks in the city. So this has become a key community asset. It's a really amazing story of what happens if you're really visionary and radical in how you treat infrastructure. You know, this is has become 24-hour space. So my student analysed these sites and how far people went during their daily life to go and visit this space, because this is their green space asset from where they live. So people would spend a significant amount of their day actually staying here, working here, talking here, enjoying this space, because it's their access to fresh air, a view away from this incredible high density around it. Okay, the shortest timescale city disruptor, apart from possibly a Trump speech, is COVID-19. And in terms of scale, unprecedented, really. And so let's just have a little bit of a think about that. So this is from the Sunday Times on the 15th of May, talking about, do you really want to live in the big metropolis anymore? Maybe not. So sustainability and density have been inherently linked. More density is better sustainability in a city, because as soon as you have density, everything is walkable. So it really helps. But there is an upper limit to density, and that's probably caused by air quality, heat waves, traffic gridlock, or potentially flooding. They will all create an upper limit. But we have always thought that that upper limit, we could build mass rapid transit infrastructure that would really help with a lot of those issues. If air quality was the issue, we could introduce a fully electric mass transit system, and that would address that air quality issue. It would also address the gridlock issue. But of course, with COVID-19, the density has just moved completely to the left. Our transport infrastructure can't run at 100% capacity. It can't run at 50% capacity, maybe 20%. So that density at the moment is not sustainable. It can't deliver the movement that we need. So a massive push towards cycling. Working from home, doing what I'm now, this is my office, shed in the garden. So everyone is using Zoom or Teams and just talking to a camera like this all day long. And interesting, during this event, there's this question about, actually, how big is your city, the space that you live in and experience during this lockdown event? maybe there isn't access to the things that you really need at the distance you can move. This is Southampton. This accommodation is probably not appropriate for lockdown living. If you think about, if you can only move for 15 minutes, half an hour from a location, maybe you can't even access some green space or some blue space. And that's what a lot of people have discovered in the last few months, that where they live, when you're unable to move, and you can just move by walking or cycling, the experiences you can have are really quite limited. But I was talking about business failures and space in the city. We know there are going to be a lot more business failures, and so there will be a lot more space in the city which will be freed up. The question is, what should happen to that space? This is a KPMG report around retail, and it's no surprises really. The landscape is changing permanently in retail. Over the next 2 years, the number of shops in city centres could halve, a 50% reduction in retail. So fundamentally, cities will change because of this one event. And on top of that, we have offices where companies realise, actually, we don't need the big office anymore. We can definitely shrink. Most of our staff can work at home 3 or 4 days a week. So the big central office will surely shrink. I pulled together this list yesterday of companies which I think have no longer trading or have gone into administration in the past few months. And sadly, this is already out of date. So there are not some more announcements today. What we've seen already is road closures happening, a massive push towards cycling. Really, what we see here is probably not appropriate for lockdown living. This hard infrastructure on the far right on that street, surely there should be some green space there. This picture in the middle is in New York of a pocket park. These sort of things need to be thought about as well-being refuges in cities, so that people can access green space, a tranquil, calm space within where they live, within 15 minutes. New services in these voids in the city, NHS drop-in facilities, click and collect, and so on. These giant buildings, what is going to happen to this site? Learning, creative spaces, innovation hubs, social care. There's a massive push towards cycling, but bicycles are no longer low-cost pieces of infrastructure hardware. They are £1,000 plus. We need high-quality provision for cycle storage, where you can have confidence that when you come back to that bike 3 hours later, it's still there. So really, sort of my conclusion is around COVID-19 is accelerating the change of retail in cities really dramatically, and that does create an opportunity to address changing city, to create spaces that we really want to live and work in, and to manage this challenge of, we want to achieve density, which is good for sustainability, but we also need to create spaces that people can experience within that high density. You can find out more about this work by visiting energy.sutton.ac.uk, and if you search for the Little Book of Rezoning, which is free as a PDF, you can download a short book around many of the aspects being talked about here, particularly around Medellin. Great, I'll pause there.
Thank you, Professor Patrick James, and to all of you for your participation. That ends our recording for tonight. We shall be back on the 20th of July for Languages of the World, in Identifying the Language of Text with Alan Ratner. You can sign up to be notified of future events at our website, wincafesci.org.uk, where you will also find details of our future programme. If you'd like to support us, you can donate to paypal.me www.win-cafe-sci. Thank you.